Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Welcome everybody to this Bruegel event on the free movement of data. It's actually quite turbulent times these days if we talk about digital data. We had today the Commission's Data Governance Act, but also on the geopolitical scene, it's a very hectic and hot topic here. We have the US-China Cold Tech War, where the EU is a bit frustrated on the side, trying to improve its position by using its single market muscle. We had Commissioner Breton with a European single market for data proposal. We had an event on that yesterday, really trying to use the single market on the one hand in order to ensure that we have within that single market transfer of data, which would improve security and trust for citizens, with, among others, the GDPR regulation, but also with a very strong industrial policy flavor, giving businesses in the EU the possibility to really build on that single market for data. And with free flow of data, allowing them to build strong positions here. And indeed, the Data Governance Act of today had some of these flavors as well. So the big question then is, if that is a single market within Europe where we have free flow of data, how open is that single market to the world? And again, in Commissioner Breton's data strategy, it's clearly said that that single market would be open, but with an assertive approach to international data flows based on European values. So that's actually the question then, how open will that EU space be? And if we then look in terms of international transfers, and then if we then look at the practice, there are only few legal exemptions for allowing the flow of personal data between the EU and the rest of the world. And these few examples are also on the constant threat of invalidation, as we have seen with the Schrems II decision for transfers with the US, where there were concerns on excessive surveillance by the US for national security purposes, where it was thought that the US Privacy Shield would not be giving enough protection to EU citizens here. So certainly on international transfers of data, there are still lots of uncertainties that need to be solved and need to be addressed in the best way that all relevant concerns are dealt with. And for that, we have an excellent panel today that will deal with this topic here. I will introduce each of the speakers in time. After first presentation of their positions, we will then move to a general discussion where also the audience can actively join. You can do this with Slido. You can either find the connection to Slido on our event page or on the website with the hashtag personal data. If you pose a question, we would appreciate that you identify who you are. And if the question is specifically addressed to some of the panel members, please also do so here. So I guess we're all set to go for this discussion. The first speaker that we will have here today is Christian Kastrup, who is the State Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection, so very well placed to deal with this issue here. He was before also the Deputy Director General of Econ and Finance Department in Germany. He also holds a PhD in economics from Köln and is currently teaching to the University of Berlin. But I would also like to point out that he was also at the foundations of Bruegel a long time ago, and he's a big friend still of Bruegel. So we're very happy to have you here. And the floor is yours, Christian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Reinhold. So no, it's nice you invited me for this topic. So in principle, I've always been somewhere in the range of the internal market, and now it's the digital internal market. Also in my earlier lives, and so it's rather nice. And again, I may highlight, I think Bruegel is still even quite some years now on the road. It's still a strong force in Brussels, I know that, and I'm very happy that I could play a minor part at the beginning. So now it has evolved into quite other dimensions. Yeah, let us talk a bit about that data sovereignty and internal market. So let me start with the with something. I think it's absolutely essential to strengthen the digital single market. I think digital technology is on the forefront. It's coming. We are still at the very beginnings of that. Some people I talk to say, hey, as we are all digital now, I think, but this is just the start. And therefore we have to see how we include this very innovative power, the modernization possibilities we have, and also all the useful things the digital technology can bring, and it can empower the digital single market. We have to look at all sides of the show, and this is very important, and I will come back to that at the end a bit. So, and we are really currently working on removing the hurdles like trade barriers. And of course, now is the issue that we have to do the very same thing also looking at the issue of digital consumer protection, or say, what is the role of the consumer in the whole system between production of goods and services, the people who need these products and services, and say the platforms which are in the middle of them. And of course, this is a complete new dimension has opened here, bringing people and sides of the market together, which in an analog world would have much more difficulties, at least to communicate, to cooperate. We now really have here a new dynamic, I think, which will still go on, and it will still get speed, and so we have to look at that. So, and right now we are shortly ahead to update some important consumer policy networks and frameworks. And first, I just mentioned them in a very rough way. We can come back to that. So, for instance, one item which unfortunately, I guess 10 days ago, failed in the Coreper, that's the e-privacy regulation. So, which was meant to strengthen data protection beyond GDPR, with a special focus also on cookies and dark patterns. Then we expect on the 9th of December is my last, at least this is my last information. I don't know whether there is already a new one. We will have a twofold package, which is very, very important, I think, for the functioning of the digital single market, also including the aspect of consumer policies and consumer protection against irregular behavior. This is the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. We are very keen looking at that, and probably even my house will be one of the chief negotiators for all these documents in the future. So I guess we have also a fruitful future, as I think this will take a while. And so we will come back to that soon, but it's extremely important, besides strengthening the functioning of the digital market here, to strengthen also the role of the consumer protection on platforms, including some common rules for also, which is important here. And Reinhold, it's also an issue of democracy. There's also the European Democracy Action Plan in a while. This is also including common rules for hate speech and disinformation on social media platforms. So, and I know especially with a view to the terrorist attacks some days ago, also in Vienna, I think this will be high on the agenda. And it will also link some issues we do not talk here probably today, but it's also important for the digital internal market and for the digital market of the world. This is about, we have also to talk about competition and competition rules, which are connected to that. Yeah? So competitiveness in the digital market is great. We need it for Europe, but how we deal with network effects and other issues, that's another show. I just want to point at that. It's not our topic today, I know. So, and then I guess in late January at least is announced another thing we are very interested in, also for the digital internal market and for the view of the consumers here. This is the AI regulation network. So it's not yet known whether it, at least to my last information my team gave me, whether it's a regulation or a directive, but for sure we need a harmonized framework, a risk-based harmonized framework, so that industry, the economic powerhouse, also consumers can reap the benefits of AI without discrimination, biases, and discrimination and having a bias normally leads to inequality, and this is what we do not want to see. On the contrary, so we would not like to see exclusion. We would like to see inclusion, so that AI is doing that and not the other side. And the downsides are, this is something I have to look a bit from an economics point. Sometimes I envy some colleagues who just talk about economics and say, hey, it's all good. It's a bit of a competition problem. It's all good. And I have to say, hey, here's also an issue of the civil society involved, which for us is very important. And this brings me back to what Reinhold just says. This is about doing it with our European values. And so that's a very important point here. So consumers need to have a fair share in the digital economy. We also will soon start a project which might also be interesting for the audience here and for Brühl. We will look into the entire idea, what do we mean with value of data? And I think nobody really knows about, so we do not really know. We talk a lot about, at my OECD times, about global value chains. We have also these global value chains also include digital value chains. And digital value chains, we do not know very much. So we are just starting some research on our own and with friends and partners. Can we get at least some value category, maybe via the productivity approach? So, and this is of course very important, because then we would have a much stronger argument also for data sovereignty. And we could also, this is B2C, B2B, P2C, P2B, we can also look about maybe how we assign certain property rights, which would also be something very interesting to look at, because it also gives you somehow a counterweight of powers in the whole system of the digital economy. So one not so unimportant issue is also better data literacy. So we also need to do there something. The GDPR, of course, is a, I think, remarkable achievement. I'm also responsible for European, it's okay, you see it, but also responsible for international affairs. And when you look from outside, when I talk to people from the international world, from the G20, they will all say, hey, the GDPR, especially here in Germany, some people say, I hate the GDPR. But when you look from outside, and also the majority, of course, here in my country and in Europe, I think GDPR is a great idea. Besides all the problems and maybe over-bureaucratic aspects, it's still a market symbol for Europe. And so I think this is something I was not aware of before starting this job, but now I value the GDPR really, really highly. And so this goes in line with a better data literacy for consumers to make informed decisions. So we can also say empowerment of people. Yeah. So this is something from Dennis Noah. I borrowed that from Dennis, but I think that's also a very important thing. So, and of course, last but not least, we need to make sure that companies and business models use better and more standardized tools for setting, for instance, cookies and similar things. So we also work and also a project about new PIMs, so privacy information management systems, which is especially important for the access and the safe access to some to websites, to apps, and to all these other things. So let me have some words to maybe Schrems too. The privacy shield, the very famous privacy shield. From a data and consumer protection perspective, of course, I welcome the ruling of the Court of Justice very much. I think that's a good point, as the level of data protection for EU citizens has been further enhanced and being putting more precise. And of course, due to the close transatlantic economic relations, and Reinhold, you say we look outside today, of course, there is a strong interest in ensuring that personal data, and especially personal data, can be transferred from the EU to the US in legal certainty and respecting all the data issues. Now we have a president-elect, probably also from this point of view, from the political economy of the whole show, we might be a bit relieved now and hopeful that maybe Joe Biden comes to a better balancing the responsibilities of the Secret Service agencies in the broadest sense, where they could look into. But again, this is also a debate we may face in Europe once in a while. We all know that President Macron also made a very strong plea for more competences also of Secret Service agencies combating terrorism. So we also have to talk about that. The Germans have been a bit reluctant on that proposal, but I know there have been talks between my Chancellor and President Macron and others. And probably, I guess, this will also somehow influence, at least here or there, maybe you know more than me, within the Digital Services Act. Maybe there is something also upcoming. So whatever we give to other third-party countries, I think has, of course, been done in compliance with the high EU data protection standards. And this is even after, of course, the US Privacy Shield has been declared invalid. What was not declared invalid have been the standard contractual clauses. So they are still existent, but it's also, I think, a bit of a problem. But as long as personal data is transferred from the EU by or to the US electronic communication service provider, I look at the right phrases here, these data importers are in principle in the same regime, so they cannot really escape. Because data importers here are likely to be prevented from complying with its data transfer obligations due to applicable US legislations and practices. And of course, in consequence, supplementary measures would have to be implemented by the data exporters. And alternatively, of course, it's still possible to have a derogation, which is foreseen in Article 49 GDPR, but this is, of course, very restricted. Of course, if the relevant person says, I know the country, there is an unsafe country, the civil secret services will look into that, and if he's willingly accepting that, then it's still possible. But of course, that's a high margin. But I know maybe the practitioners can tell me a bit more about how they see that as a good possibility or what can be done. Yeah, in this situation, first and foremost, the European Commission is being called upon in discussions with the US. Will have to be clarified whether there is a new willingness to enter into renewed negotiations. And in doing so, reflecting our standards, a bit of the GDPR in the result. So I think it is important that any possible solution fully complies with it and the requirements of Schrems II judgment and creates also legal certainty for those being affected. Yeah, I should mention, of course, just recently we have the EDPB published these recommendations. It's a little book. I have already flown over it. Recommendations on measures that supplement transfer tools, such as the mentioned SCCs, to ensure compliance with the EU data protection requirements. Yeah, these guidelines also emphasize the primary responsibility of exporters to ensure that the data transferred is in the right way done, and that the third country level of protection essentially is equivalent to the guaranteed within the EU. And so that's, of course, somewhat problematic and very, it's a long process. You have really to have a full-blown risk assessment, and so that is not easy. And now comes my little view to the Brexit. Of course, when the UK will leave, 31st January 2020, or it's left already, and the transition period will come to an end. We don't know, whatever. You are closer in Brussels probably and know more. The UK will be considered principally as a third country relative to the GDPR. And of course, then personal data movements, exported data or imported data will be governed by Chapter 5. So, and of course, Schrems II ruling is also relevant, not just for data to the US, it will also then be relevant for any international transfer from the EU to a third country. And these particular assessment obligations needs to be taken into account. So up to the European Commission to assess whether the UK then really ensures an adequate level. I would still hope that, and I think it would probably be most stupid not to do it, but let's see. So, yeah, coming to an end, let me just somehow sum it up. I think the EU model of data protection within the digital single market as an entire part of that, for me, creates a globally well-respected economic model. Not everybody may like it, and in the European sphere, it's not, you cannot do everything what is possible. You have to accept a certain rule. This is our values. It's part of our liberal open societies. It's about our economic model. I think in the sum, this is attractive, and I do not see even what some people here in Germany, my friends from the Ministry of Economics, say, Christian, now we have Corona, forget about all this. We need 2 years. Economics has to be, don't put any obstacles into the recovery process. I don't know, I don't do that. So for me, this is a holistic view that economic modernization and innovation comes with responsibility also within the civil society. And I think this is a business model where Europe can have some low-hanging fruits. If you look with the geopolitical developments, authoritarianism on the move. So we should preserve that and strengthen that. And I stop with this, Reinhard.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really impressive. You really sketched a very active government EU initiatives in many different aspects, a lot of sides of the show as you illustrated here. So I think it really is also a good time to now turn to how industry deals with that, all what's going on here. And for that, we are very happy to have Christian Borggreen in our event. He's the Vice President and the head of the Brussels office of the Computer and Communications Industry Association, which represents industry both EU as well as non-EU. He also leads the engagement of the CCCI internationally with, among others, WTO. And he also knows the US scene very well. He was at the mission of the EU from the US and also in the US state. So I think he's very well placed to represent the perspectives of industry on these EU-US data transfer issues. Christian, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The pandemic certainly has accelerated the digitalization of Europe's economy. I mean, we work remotely, we're studying remotely, and even local shops are now going online. And the very fact that we can have this conversation today with remote participants from Germany, from Brussels, from the UK, from everywhere, is because, of course, that data can now flow freely. And data flows are therefore more important than ever. And just like we all want to avoid a second or third physical lockdown, we all want to also avoid any data lockdowns. The problem, and in a way it's partly positive. Mr. Kastrup mentioned it earlier. The EU has been a front runner in data protection for decades, right? But this also means that a few parts of the EU's very good data protection regime builds on some pre-internet notions, namely that personal data can only leave the EU under certain exemptions. One of those exemptions, the EU-US Privacy Shield, was struck down this summer. And that created, of course, this immediate significant uncertainty for thousands of businesses, European businesses, international businesses, and in particular for small businesses. Most of these businesses that used Privacy Shield were small and medium-sized companies. More importantly, companies now face uncertainty for all the data transfers from the EU to the rest of the world, as Mr. Kastrup said, regardless of the legal tools that they are using. So concretely, companies are now asked to determine, so the burden is now on companies, right? They need to determine whether the foreign laws in up to 150 countries around the world meet the EU standards to allow for their routine day-to-day data transfers. And this is, of course, a major task for companies, especially if you're an SME. And perhaps it's really only a determination that a court can do, as we saw recently. It is very frustrating for European and for international companies to feel caught between conflicting EU and international laws, which significantly limit their ability to do business. In the meantime, of course, while we're trying to get more clarity, businesses, of course, taking action. They're taking active measures to address concern raised by the recent court rulings. For instance, this week, Microsoft highlighted measures that they are taking, to challenge any government request for public sector or enterprise customer data, the continued use of strong encryption, obviously without giving governments any encryption key, transparency reporting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was briefly mentioned the Brexit talks and the need for continued data flows. So the UK has been part of the EU for, 50 years now. And therefore, they're, of course, considered adequate to receive personal data from the EU. It's therefore a little bit mind-blowing that if at the stroke of midnight, suddenly day-to-day commercial data transfers from companies would be considered illegal. I mean, what happened from one minute to another? Is it really illegal? What is going on? I mean, it's kind of frustrating here, right? There was a recent study, I think came out yesterday from the think tank New Economics Foundation that put the cost for British companies, if there is no adequacy deal reached between the EU and the UK by the end of this year, they put the price for companies at £1.6 billion. And this is just incredible, right? So obviously, as international businesses, we are begging EU and UK negotiators to please reach an agreement as soon as possible to avoid any unnecessary legal uncertainty and costs. Finally, it was mentioned a few times today, the European Commission put forward its Data Governance Acts. This data sharing that they're trying to achieve, it's driving innovation, it's driving social benefits, and the Commission's proposal from the day, it takes important steps towards that, which is very positive. I'm still going through the document, it's pretty complex, but one part, since we're discussing the EU's adequacy regime to allow for personal data transfers to the rest of the world, which is causing a lot of problems, as you know. But it seems in this proposal that the Commission is proposing a similar sort of cumbersome EU adequacy regime for certain types of non-personal data flows to third countries. So that is interesting that they're copying this very cumbersome regime for personal data that may be copied now for types of non-personal data. And I mean, if this would mean more complexity and more limitation to international data transfers, that would be troublesome. Obviously, as businesses, we're hoping for less, not more restrictions on international data transfers. So to conclude, data flows have become an essential part of everybody's life and of day-to-day business for companies. But recent court rulings, Brexit, etc., are creating significant legal uncertainty and economic cost for companies, and especially for SMEs. Companies, we're taking steps to ensure continued privacy and security, but at the end of the day, we need governments to agree on durable and safe data transfer frameworks that we can rely on and that consumers can rely on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. So clearly you identified the difficulties of industry with dealing with uncertainty and also with complexity and fragmentation. So another important issue that was raised already was the position of the UK. Unfortunately, the UK will soon be an extra EU partner here and will then also be forced to this adequacy challenge here. So definitely interesting to look at what impact that would have. And we're very happy to have Joe Jones here, who heads the team of the UK government responsible for digital issues and negotiating on this here. So he's very well placed to assess what the impact and the position of the UK will be in the very near future. Joe?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope you can hear and see me perfectly well. I thought I'd do three main things. First, give an update on where we are with our discussions with the EU on these issues. Secondly, I thought it would be helpful to sketch out what it is the UK government has done to date on these issues, what it is we're preparing to do, and what it is we're urging and encouraging organisations and businesses to do in advance of the clock striking midnight, as Christian was saying earlier, on the December the 31st this year. And thirdly and finally, I'll give a brief overview into what the future holds for the UK on data policy issues and data transfer issues, looking beyond 1st of January 2021. But I do think it's important, and Christian makes a very important point. These issues are not esoteric points of jurisprudence. Data transfers are, as this COVID-19 pandemic has proven, data transfers are critical to keeping economies moving, keeping societies functioning, not just for conferences like this, but also seeing family and loved ones online, and for protecting citizens and keeping citizens safe. And it's very important that we bear all of that context in mind as we consider the specific aspects of the legal cases and the developments that we consider. But first, on EU adequacy. So it has been a UK government objective to get EU adequacy decisions, plural. There are two we're seeking, one for the GDPR and one for law enforcement processing. Going back to my point around how important it is to have data transfers to prevent and detect crime. So we're seeking those two decisions. We have had some constructive discussions with our counterparts in the European Commission. Our view has always been that adequacy is a technical exercise. The exercise is, are UK laws and practices adequate, essentially equivalent? And I hear and recognise the points that have been made before me. I agree with them all. We don't see there to be any reason why the UK should not be adequate. Why on the 1st of January, the UK should not be adequate when on the 31st of December, the day before, organisations can send data, personal data, freely between the EU and the United Kingdom. Now, that said, this is an EU process. So it is the European Commission assessing the United Kingdom. What have we done for that? So we participate in discussions. We have actually published, it's available publicly, a detailed note that sets out all of our laws and practices relating to data protection and why we think those laws and practices meet, if not go beyond, EU standards for data protection, and why we think we should be adequate. So that's what we've done. The other important thing to note is we spend a lot of time talking about data flowing from the EU to the United Kingdom. What we have done in the UK government is we have recognised the EU as adequate, so that if you are sending data from the UK to the member states, to the EU institutions, from the UK to Europe, there's an adequacy decision for that. And that was very important to us to ensure continuity of flows. We actually made that decision before COVID, before Schrems 2, but now more than ever, there's a real need to keep, as I say, economies going, citizens supported. Now is not the time to pull up the drawbridge on international data transfers. So that was a very important decision for us, and it's something that we'll have in place for the 1st of January. Now, we're 37 days away from the end of the year. I don't know where time has gone this year, but and whilst we don't see there to be any good reason why the UK shouldn't get adequacy, we are encouraging organisations to take appropriate measures for the end of the year should the UK not get adequacy. Now, so I'm not going to advise for specific circumstances for specific organisations. I think the key message here is organisations should be seeking advice. They should be mapping their data flows, and they should be putting in mechanisms that can withstand that scenario where the UK does not get EU adequacy. And that's important that businesses do that. And we are working with the Information Commissioner's Office, our regulator, to put out public guidance. I'm very happy to share that with Bruegel after this meeting, but there's guidance on our website and on the regulator's guidance for how to prepare for the end of the year. So that's an update on where we are with the EU, what we have been doing, and what we've done to date. Just looking forward for a moment. Now, the UK inherits a lot of EU law. It inherits the GDPR. One aspect of the GDPR it inherits is the ability to do adequacy itself, to design and deliver and implement alternative transfer mechanisms for non-adequate countries itself. And herein lies the opportunity. I think there is a genuine opportunity for the UK, the EU, and countries of the world to embrace different ways of legislating and regulating for high standards of data protection. What we're really interested in is high standards and the outcome of protection. And I think there is an opportunity now for countries to embrace the fact that countries do things differently. Right? The form and the means might be different, but the outcome and the end result is the same. And that's because countries have different cultural traditions, different legal practices and traditions, historical contexts, constitutional contexts. And I actually think we need to recognize and embrace that difference. I take the point made earlier about the GDPR being sort of best in class and other countries outside of Europe looking to that as a perfect model. In some cases, that I'm sure that is true, but in other cases, it may not always make sense for countries internationally to just lift the GDPR and supplant it into their own system. And I think it's an exciting opportunity where I think we saw some statistics recently said 140 countries now have data privacy rules. That is a real change from not just 10 years ago, but probably 2-3 years ago. So there's an opportunity here for greater connectivity on data transfers and what that can do for economic growth, for enriching lives, and for protecting citizens from threats and crime. On Schrems 2 specifically, and I think it is worth saying something specific to that case. And look, we as government and our independent regulator recognize the uncertainty that that case has caused. We, along with a few other member states, intervened in that case to argue that the privacy shield should not be, the validity of the privacy shield should not be decided in that case. This was a case that was first and foremost about the SCCs. So of course, we were disappointed that the privacy shield was invalidated, and we said that at the time. That was a framework that had over 5,000 companies in it, who in turn served thousands more other organizations. So there's a real material impact with that. But we recognize that the EU and the United States are discussing how to improve on that arrangement, how to agree an enhanced framework that respects EU privacy and fundamental rights. And we think a framework that can do that whilst also recognizing the importance of data transfers is really important to have. Just on the guidance that was issued last week and the new SCCs, obviously these are new. I appreciate organizations are going through them, trying to understand the detail, what it is that's required of them. We, government and our regulator, will be putting out guidance on this as well. Guidance that's targeted at UK organizations. But as I said, these are not esoteric points. Things have become increasingly more difficult, I suppose, to send data internationally. And that is happening at the same time as the need to send data internationally has increased exponentially. And the services and the goods that depend on international data transfers has increased exponentially. So it's a very interesting challenge. There's a very interesting opportunity there, and it's an opportunity that I think governments around the world can take advantage of if they do it in a collaborative, quite pragmatic, and also a creative way.
Thanks a lot, Joe. I really like also this attitude of you to really and try to make sure that we search for alternative ways to reach the same target that we all are concerned about. Resonates also quite a lot with this innovation-proof type of regulations where you really are much more forward-looking and using all the technologies available in the future so that it's the target that is reached rather than technology-specific course, also, I think something that Christian also hinted at with his pre-internet notions, I guess. Finally, we have the last but not least speaker here, which is Scott Markets, which is our senior fellow at Bruegel, who is dealing with policies regarding electronic communications. He's really an expert in this, and he will be able to take a think tank perspective encompassing all the various perspectives that we've heard of today. Beyond knowing the EU landscape very well, he also knows the US landscape very well. He's a US citizen, but he also had a lot of experience in the US. He was a senior advisor for internet technologies at the United States FCC, and he was also the chief technology officer of Genuity, which is still one of the world's largest backbone internet service providers here. So he combines all kinds of expertise here to be our last speaker in the series here to have an encompassing perspective on international data transfers. Scott, you're going to solve all the challenges that were raised.
I'll do my best. Well, one of the joys and also one of the challenges of speaking last on a panel with so many really excellent experts is that many of the points that I would have made have been made and have been made very well. So I need not repeat them. Actually, I would say that I agreed with just about everything that Dr. Kastrup said, and he said them better than I could have. Just take that as written, and let me try to jump then to some issues that I think were covered a little less in the previous comments, if I might. First, on the new Data Governance Act, I was happy to see it. As many of you will know, I was moderating a panel yesterday with Commissioner Thierry Breton and Max Schrems. So we knew it was coming. We knew a little about what was coming, and it's directionally right. And also, I would say that the political messaging is right. But I think we also need to be cautious not to expect too much from it. Many of the aspects that are covered are things like data altruism, data brokers. They all sound good, but one has to wonder how much of this will we actually see, particularly considering that the regulatory conditions that have to be fulfilled are relatively stringent, as they must be. But at the end of the day, I think that it's in the right direction. I think we shouldn't expect it to have a huge impact. And perhaps that's as need be. The previous legislative term already had things about public sector data, already had things about non-personal data. The low-hanging fruit was probably already plucked, and there's a limit to what can be obtained today. One of the key things that I like about the Data Governance Act as written is that it took pains mostly, and I take note of Christian Borggreen's comment here, but mostly it's not creating new barriers to data transfer. Mostly it's creating new opportunities that weren't there before. But we have serious impediments, especially because of Schrems 2. So with Schrems 2, let me say first, although I'm American by birth, I like the GDPR. I like the European approach to privacy. I think it's doing a lot of things right. I also think that the US approach to government surveillance really is excessive. And it's good that the Schrems 2 decision creates a lot of back pressure on the United States government to think harder about what they're doing. And yet, surveillance is necessary. And surveillance has two very different forms for law enforcement versus national security purposes. So I think directionally, again, the Court of Justice decision made sense, but I see a number of challenges with it. The first is, of course, that European companies didn't really know how to comply. We have the EDPB guidance now, the European Data Protection Board guidance. I also took, as Dr. Kastrup, kind of we would say a Daumenkino, a quick glance through it. The conditions that have to be met are pretty onerous. So it's going to be hard for a lot of European companies. The right way to fix this is to try to get something like Privacy Shield, but on a much stronger institutional design basis. Privacy Shield was a very weak structure. Everybody knew that at the time. The parts that relate to government surveillance, which was really what both Schrems cases were about, commercial privacy had nothing to do with it. It was all about government surveillance. And those parts weren't even a treaty. It was really a set of memoranda from one set of US agencies to the Department of Commerce. So there's nothing in CGAU decision that prevents a successor to Privacy Shield that would be judicially sustainable. but we're not there today. What I didn't much like about the CGAU decision was they said, well, you've got Article 49 of GDPR. We don't need to give you any more time to comply like we did in 2015. Get on it, fix it. The companies can already figure out what to do. And I think that puts an unreasonable burden on the companies. So those are the aspects that worried me in the CGAU decision. Now, as far as UK, the issues there are going to be, I think, largely the same as the issues with the United States. As far as commercial privacy, I think the UK is probably great. They've been a part of the EU for 40 years. Those aren't going to change overnight, hopefully aren't going to change in bad ways ever. The issue will be entirely about government surveillance and whether it's possible to create a structure, I think, similar to what's going to be needed with the United States in conjunction with data transfers from the EU to the UK. And my hope is that that can come into play, and my hope is that it can come into play quickly, because as I think has been abundantly clear in everyone's comments, those data transfers are really important. They're important not only to UK businesses and US businesses and EU businesses, they're also extremely important to EU consumers who use all of these services from all of these countries. So it needs to get fixed, it needs to get fixed urgently. As an American, I'm happy that there's a change of the political wind on the other side of the Atlantic. And I think we now have an administration with which we can at least have a reasoned discussion on this. And I hope that we do, and I hope that it moves quickly. And with that, back to you, Reinilde.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott. It was a challenging discussion, but we had very important and very interesting perspectives, various perspectives also. We also are getting quite a lot of questions from Slido. I'm going to pick out some of them. First question is actually to do, and I think it addresses Mr. Kastrup. So so you rightly say we have to make the EU really as a and the single market, digital single market, a very attractive package for citizens, but also for businesses here. But then the question raises, how single is the EU single market? So how much is there indeed consensus among the different member states in what that single and how that single market should look like? And then particularly with respect to security issues and data privacy. So is it really one coherent single market or are there different still various perspectives? And that would run then the risk of having much more fragmentation than we would ideally want in the single market. So,
okay, I can, yeah, of course, this is, I think the question is, of course, well put. And of course, as anyway, the digital market, the single market initiative, you know, was on a long road. And the digital single market is a road even somewhat longer. And there is another issue open. I mentioned it here because Bruegel works on that too. This is about a single financial market. So do we have that? No, of course not. And of course, or there are big missing pieces. And I would agree, and I do not want to paint it too rosy. And I know that we still have to devote a lot of additional work to a fully full-blown digital single market, and there is a lot of problems to be solved, which are not yet mentioned. So of course you can have a long debate about the land of origin, or what is the land of origin, which is our fundamental baseline, land of origin. There are a lot of exceptions. And of course, also for Germany, there are some exceptions, and my government battled for some of the exceptions. I do not share all the exceptions, but I do share at least some which are relevant, which are not in the goods and services part, but which are, for instance, if we talk about specific forms of racism and hate speech on the platforms and on the messenger services. So so there is, it will always be an ongoing debate to make the market, the digital internal market, complete. It will never be 100% complete. There will be some exceptions also from the principle of the country of origin, and the surveillance procedure will be discussed. I'm also under discussion. It's also my responsibility to come clear with that. and I think we come forward with the Commission. But of course, I agree, there is not really this digital single market, and the debate we just had until now, of course, feeds into that. And I think this is always a struggle to balance it. And I mentioned at the beginning of my remark, for instance, the German presidency, we really tried hard. And I can tell you, I gave away a lot of red lines for the ministry of for my ministry, and that we put it into the Coreper, and the Coreper said no. So we got a compromise, but I don't know, 11 countries or 14 countries said no. So for me, this was more an enhancement of the GDPR, but a lot of other member states said no, this will incur so many over-the-top restrictions, how to give away data and for what reason to give away data. And I give you an example. Indeed, I battled for that there could not just be data extracted without acknowledgement of the person who gives it, without the consensus. If there is just, there is relevant interest. So I couldn't accept that. This is for me not part of a business model that somebody can say there is a relevant interest, and then you get the data without even telling, without even asking the person who gives the data point in the system. So we do not talk about now, there are a lot of other issues connected. It's about autonomous drive and all these issues. I know we have to deal with that. We have to find our consensus. Germany is also only one member of the Union, and we will get together again and we will try to solve this e-privacy problem, which is now pending. Reinhold, if I'm not mistaken, it's 5 years. It's going in the 5th year. This is just crazy. And this is something which goes back to my former life, working on EU issues and on international issues. Europe has to come down with a better mechanism for building up consensus, which is on the one hand, of course, it should never be in the way of innovation, modernization, high productivity, economic new products and services, and the digital products, the intangibles. This is highly relevant for the economic of the European Union. It's not just a standard for the world, it's also for us, it's important. And I would be the last who would like to stand in the way. But again, we have to calibrate it. And I get emotional now. Now I stop it here, Reinhold. That's my quick response. So the question is right. And we have really to get together, also in contact with our friends from abroad. And of course, I'm pretty sure that the UK rules are very much in line, at least from the beginning, with what is in the European Union. It would be stupid not to be. The only issue is how do we deal with this divergence? And I agree also, Joe made a good point. This is also something, of course, there should also be a competition on rules, of course. Yeah. So I would not say that what we have with the GDPR plus e-privacy is the best of all worlds. I just want to point that it is part of our values and of our open liberal societies, which takes respect of the personal era, which cannot be just be put on risk, as we see it in some authoritarian models. The Turks are very interested in our new so-called network enforcement law. And of course, I'm very well aware if you put such a law in a liberal open society, it has a complete different possibilities to influence the individual sphere than you can do it within a more or less authoritarian government. And this is somewhere, so if we export even some European models in another culture, it was mentioned, this might not be the best way forward. And okay, I know the adequacy procedure is a long and winding road. And to give, I strongly now to Joe and also to Christian, I really hope that it will not take months. But I know some European processes are much too slow. I agree with that immediately as a start.
Yeah, yeah, consensus building, that's always a challenge in Europe. But I would also like to point out that innovation could actually also be an instrument that could help for the future to find consensus if we're looking at more alternative ways of building kind of platform type of regulations where it would be much easier to accommodate different sets of regulations here. Yeah.
If I may?
You wanna on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Good. No, I just wanted to say I was part of a team that just finished a study for the European Parliament on exactly these single market issues. They were especially interested in understanding whether things on the single market were getting worse over time. It's clear that this will never be perfect. There are a million issues, things like mutual recognition, that are always going to be a headache. But our conclusions were that the things on balance are slowly getting better, not worse over time. Publicly available study from the Internal Market Committee of the European Parliament.
Yep. That's right. I should have mentioned that. It's good. Yep. So, but the most popular question on Slido is actually to deal with multilateral approach. So we've been talking a lot about the EU and the US and bilateral, and also with the UK. That was also a UK-EU bilateral. But shouldn't this also be explored much more in a multilateral setting here, trying to find some global coordination of rule setting here was also something that Christian, you mentioned as something that industry would definitely be looking for, and with your experience of working multilaterally, could you address that question?
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's a great question. And I think you can, because Europe has two issues, right? They have data protectionism happening where European companies are forced to store data locally in China and other countries, right? So you could probably imagine a coalition with like-minded countries to fight back against data protectionism and trade protectionism. So you can do that in different kind of forum, either from a trade angle or the OECD or other like-minded clubs. And then on top of that, unless you want to change the whole EU adequacy system for data flows, you just have to make different kind of you just build on what you have, including adequacy agreement with the UK and coming up with a new transatlantic regime and other kind of things to make sure that you of course remain the EU's very, very high standard of data protection, but still allow for day-to-day commercial data transfers to be able to flow to the EU's trading partners.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to say something about?
Yeah, look, just a quick word for me. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening out there, both OECD, G7, G20, WTO as the Joint Statement Initiative. In short, there are a lot of horses in the race, and people are backing different ones to different degrees and different extents. But the broader point.
Would be the best horse?
Well, I don't know yet, but the broader point is that governments should be reaching out to one another and speaking with one another and with industry and sitting on panels like the one that Bruegel has convened today to hear about the different approaches, to collaborate, find common and shared ground, and to work up solutions. And I think that therein is a great opportunity, I think, for governments, whether or not that's in a formal prescribed international forum context or not. The broader point is that one.
Yeah.
Yes, if I might, the new generation FTAs often include a chapter on digital services. The adequacy decision with Japan was part of the same negotiation that led to the FTA between the EU and Japan. So this is an approach that could be taken. And if the EU were ever to join the CPTPP, one could easily imagine that part of the discussion would indeed involve privacy for a large number of countries.
Yeah, I just want to make on that point, the EU's data flow language in its trade agreements, it's not very ambitious, unfortunately. It could even be argued that it could give carte blanche to countries to store data locally if they just put a label on it that's called, oh, this is for data protection reasons. So I think it is possible to both allow to avoid data protectionism, but at the same time allow for data flows.
Yeah.
I think the best way to do this is by leading by example, and I think the EU has a great opportunity to do that.
So Mr. Kassem, do you have views on and or have insights on which multilateral settings would be?
In principle, I agree quite a bit with what has been just said, and I was also, of course, at the OECD responsible for something like that, and I especially was several times on traveling in Asia, also to bring some Asian countries closer to the OECD, and there was always the issue of the different culture, of the different setting of rules, and of course, I think we could be a kind of a, Europe could be a kind of a big, we have an asset. I said that at the very beginning, but of course I'm very well aware when you talk about in the G20 environment, I think the European model is one of other models. I'm still convinced that we have a kind of a, something which is attractive also for businesses in the end, but I'm also very well aware that you need for the continuous data flows, and I agree to what has been said by Christian and Joe, that this is so important for keeping the speed of welcome modernization and welcome new highly productive jobs in Europe. I see that. And I'm very well aware that somehow we have to be a consensus there. So I think a very good step, also connecting to the point Scott mentioned with the FTAs, a very good point would be first that maybe we can come to a quick agreement, say on Schrems, that EU and US can agree on that. So that we really got another privacy shield, which then really encompasses, say, the American way of seeing it and the European. I think these are the leading forces of liberal open societies, or at least they should be. And under the Biden government, I would expect to return on that path. And then I would hope that we can calibrate security interests with the respect for privacy communications, which are not being tapped the way you do them. And then I think if we have this, if we have really a better consensus at the G20, and then we can see, hey, come on, how can we come to terms then with say the big other player, they say, so the Chinese, but I do not mean just China. Yeah, so this is whatever is so there is really a bit of a problem. And I remember I had a very fierce debate in the foreign ministry in Beijing, where I was told, you will see on a global level, you will not come out with your European standards. Our way is very successful and a lot of countries will like it. Let's see. I cannot solve that problem. I just think we need a strong force, say, of our liberal economic model with a liberal society, and not say a liberal economic model, but within a very authoritarian and tightly controlled societies. This will, I still hope in the end this will not fly and that the consensus is more on our side. But we don't know. We are in a global world and we cannot, Europe as Germany, we are all dwarfs in the end. And so we have to see where are our entire assets, socially, economically, and technology.
Yep. So clearly this has to be multilaterally solved. That's for sure here. And as long as the communications is going on, there is at least a path forward to consensus building. That's important. There are still a few smaller questions. They're mostly with addressing Joe's problem of what if the UK doesn't get the adequacy, so what contingency plans, but I guess that's a bit going into too much detail, but still just to signal that there is a lot of concern also on our participants' parts on what will happen in the UK here. So if I don't think there's still quite a lot of different questions here, but we can also try to put them after the event to Joe for response here. So I would like to thank everybody. We really had a great discussion on a topic that's really very pivotal here. I would like to end with a very optimistic note, saying that although it's a very complex issue with lots of stuff going on here, I think the perspectives, the various perspectives that we had here today, all have too much in common to not be able to find a consensus, and the willingness to look for alternatives that would actually reach the targets are definitely there, and assure us that we will be able to move forward here. So thanks a lot to everybody here, and I would also like to point out that Bruegel will definitely be following this topic very closely here with follow-up events here. Actually, already in 2 days' time, we will have one on digital platforms and regulation and competition. So do please check Breugel's website on this for more events on that. Thanks a lot again for all the participants in the panel, and also for all the question and answers giving in the Slido here.